You've probably heard of it, a 14-foot-long piece of linen cloth with the faint, ghostly image of a crucified man on it. It's the Shroud of Turin. For centuries, it's been this object of, well, both intense faith and intense debate. It's a puzzle science just can't seem to solve. And today, we're going to dive into that puzzle through the eyes of one man who went to prove it was a fake. But let's just say he found something else entirely.
So let's just start with the big one. What if this thing, this artifact that's been studied more than pretty much any other in history, what if it just flat out shouldn't exist based on everything we know about science? That is the absolute core of the mystery we're exploring today. And our guide on this wild journey is Barry Schwartz. He was the official documenting photographer for the first ever scientific team allowed to study the Shroud up close. And his words right here, they just perfectly capture the whole conflict. He wasn't looking for a miracle. He was a skeptic. He went there expecting to document the takedown of a medieval fraud. Okay, so let's get into it. The story doesn't begin in some ancient time. Nope. It starts in 1978 with a bunch of scientists, a whole lot of equipment, and one very, very skeptical photographer. So picture this. It's 1978, and for the first time ever, a team of over 30 experts, we're talking physicists, chemists, forensic specialists, you name it, they were given unprecedented 24/7 access to the Shroud. Barry Schwartz, a professional technical photographer, was hired for one simple job: create the official, objective, visual record of everything they did. Now here's the kicker, and why his perspective is so important. He was the perfect impartial observer. You know, he was Jewish, he had absolutely zero belief in Christian relics. He was totally convinced it was a painting, and his job was just to take some high-quality pictures of the scientists proving it. That's it. But what his camera and all the other fancy scientific instruments started to show, well, it was something else entirely. This is the part of the story where the hard evidence starts to completely unravel the simple forgery theory. So the team known as STURP, they found 4 key properties of the image that when you put them all together, they just defy any known artistic technique or natural process we know of. Let's break these down because this is where things get really weird. Okay, first, the photographic negative thing. This is mind-blowing. When Schwartz developed his film, the negative, which is normally the inverted image, showed a perfectly clear, detailed, positive image. This means the image on the cloth itself is the negative. Think about that. A medieval artist could not possibly have created this. Photography wouldn't even be invented for another 500 years. And if that wasn't strange enough, there's the 3D information. This is wild. When the scientists put the image data into a device that NASA used to map planets, it created a perfect 3-dimensional relief of a human body. The brightness of the image is directly tied to how far the cloth was from the body. You just can't do that with a painting or a regular photograph. They just turn into a distorted mess. The Shroud somehow has actual spatial data woven into it. So after 5 straight days of non-stop testing, the team, and remember, this team was made up of Christians, Jews, agnostics, the whole spectrum, they all reached this very carefully worded conclusion. They couldn't say what made the image, but they could say for sure what didn't make it. It wasn't a painting. The mystery, instead of being solved, had just gotten a whole lot deeper. But then, a decade later, the whole narrative just gets flipped on its head. It seemed like science finally had a definitive slam-dunk answer that just threw all of those STURP findings right out the window. So in 1988, 3 world-class labs get a sample of the cloth to do carbon-14 dating, and the result comes back unanimous. The linen is medieval. It dates from sometime between 1260 and 1390. And this just directly, completely contradicted all the evidence about the image itself. So, that's it, right? Case closed? A clever medieval forgery after all? Well, for Schwartz and for many of the original scientists, the details of that test, they just didn't sit right. See, the problem, as they saw it, wasn't the science of carbon dating, it was the sample. The tiny piece they tested was taken from the single most handled, most contaminated, and most repaired corner of the entire 14-foot cloth. Schwartz argued, look, if you want to date a potentially 2,000-year-old artifact, you don't take your sample from the patch that nuns rewove in the 16th century after a fire. For them, the C14 test only proved that the repair patch was medieval, not the whole cloth. So for decades, the debate was just stuck there, in a stalemate. But very recently, a completely new line of evidence has popped up, and it's brought this whole mystery roaring back to life. In 2022, using DNA tech that's light years beyond what we had before, geneticists took another look at DNA that had been lifted from dust particles on the Shroud. And what they found was, in Barry Schwartz's own words, deeply unusual. The DNA sequences they found, they didn't really fit neatly with any known human population, ancient or modern. And as you can see here, all the easy explanations just don't quite work. If it were just random contamination from people touching it, the patterns shouldn't be so consistent. If it was some lost ancient tribe, its DNA should still fall somewhere on the map of human genetic variation. But it doesn't. The data is just an anomaly.
So, where does all of this leave us? And, more importantly, where does it leave Barry Schwartz, the skeptic who's now dedicated 46 years of his life to studying this one object?
This right here is his conclusion, and it is so, so important to understand. He's not making a leap of faith. He is making a statement based on decades of evidence. He isn't saying it's a religious miracle. He's saying that the physics, the chemistry, and now the genetics, they all point to something truly extraordinary that our science just cannot explain yet.
And that's exactly why Schwartz is now pushing for a new, full-scale round of research. We have tools today that the 1978 team could only have dreamed of. He's arguing it's time to bring all that modern tech to the table, get a better sample for dating from the center of the cloth, use much stricter controls for DNA analysis, and finally try to answer these fundamental questions that are still hanging in the air.
And that's where we are today. After all this time, all this research, we still can't say what the Shroud of Turin is. The data that a skeptic's camera captured back in 1978 has led us down a rabbit hole that is complex, contradictory, and honestly profoundly mysterious. So the final question is, are we on the verge of finally solving this puzzle, or are we looking at a mystery that will always be just beyond our scientific reach?